The political landscape of the United States, already deeply polarized, was profoundly shaken by an assassination attempt on Donald Trump during his 2024 presidential campaign. While the attempt was unsuccessful, its reverberations extend far beyond the immediate incident, forcing a stark reevaluation of political discourse, security protocols, and the escalating threat of violence in American public life. The attack, which occurred in Pennsylvania, was not an isolated incident but a jarring punctuation mark in a period characterized by a worrying rise in political animosity and aggression. Before this event, the U.S. had already witnessed a disturbing trend of increased threats against public officials, acts of vandalism, and even the January 6th Capitol attack. The attempt on a prominent political figure amplified pre-existing concerns, bringing the issue of political violence to the forefront of national conversation in an undeniable way. In the immediate aftermath, the nation grappled with shock and condemnation. There was a bipartisan outpouring of concern for Trump's safety, and leaders from across the political spectrum denounced the act of violence. Security measures for political rallies and public appearances were swiftly reviewed and enhanced, reflecting a newfound urgency in protecting candidates and elected officials. For the Secret Service, the incident served as a critical wake-up call, prompting extensive internal investigations and reforms into planning and communication protocols for high-profile events. Beyond the institutional response, the attack ignited intense public debate. While some voices called for unity and a de-escalation of heated rhetoric, others intensified their blame, often pointing fingers at opposing political factions or specific media narratives. This reaction underscored the deep divisions within the country, where even a shared experience of trauma could be filtered through partisan lenses. The assassination attempt highlighted the perilous line between passionate political debate and the incitement of violence. Experts and commentators widely discussed how rhetoric, particularly that which demonizes opponents, might inadvertently contribute to an environment where individuals feel justified in resorting to extreme acts. The incident prompted renewed calls for public figures to temper their language and for media outlets to consider their role in shaping public sentiment. Moreover, the attempt forced a deeper examination of domestic extremism. While the motives of attackers are often complex and can be rooted in individual psychological factors, political violence often draws from broader ideological currents. The event reignited discussions about how extremist narratives, amplified by social media and certain news ecosystems, can radicalize individuals and lead them to commit violent acts against those they perceive as enemies. It underscored the persistent challenge of monitoring and mitigating threats from within the country. The security apparatus around political figures has fundamentally changed. The vulnerability exposed by the attempt has led to heightened vigilance, stricter crowd control measures, and potentially more restricted access to candidates and officials during public engagements. This creates a tension between the need for security and the democratic tradition of public accessibility for political leaders. From a political standpoint, such an event, even if unsuccessful, can have complex and sometimes unpredictable consequences. Historically, attacks on political figures can galvanize support for the victim, fostering a sense of shared adversity and rallying a political base. It can also solidify a leader's image as a resilient figure, having faced and overcome grave danger. Conversely, it can also deepen existing societal fissures, with different groups interpreting the event through their own grievances and fears, potentially leading to increased polarization rather than unity. The 2024 assassination attempt on Donald Trump serves as a stark and enduring reminder of the fragility of democratic processes when confronted by the specter of political violence. It has forced the U.S. to confront uncomfortable truths about the intensity of its internal divisions and the potential for these divisions to manifest in dangerous ways. Moving forward, the challenge for the United States will be to address the root causes of this increasing political animosity, strengthen democratic institutions, and find pathways for robust public discourse that does not devolve into calls for or acts of violence. The shadow of the 2024 attempt will likely loom over American politics for years, a constant reminder of the high stakes involved in an era of heightened polarization. Unpacking the motivations. Why tariffs and political violence defined a U.S. era. The recent history of the United States has been marked by two deeply significant, albeit distinct, phenomena: the aggressive imposition of tariffs on allies like the European Union, and the shocking 2024 assassination attempt on Donald Trump. Understanding the reasons behind these circumstances requires looking at both economic philosophy and the profound shifts in American political culture. The rationale behind the tariffs: America first and economic grievances. Donald Trump's decision to levy tariffs on European goods was rooted in a deeply held, yet controversial economic ideology encapsulated by his America First doctrine. This policy posited that the United States had been systematically disadvantaged by decades of what he viewed as unfair global trade practices. Obsession with trade deficits. A primary driver was Trump's intense focus on trade deficits. He perceived these deficits, particularly with the European Union, as evidence that other nations were taking advantage of the U.S., draining wealth and costing American jobs. To him, a deficit wasn't merely an economic metric, but a tangible sign of economic exploitation. Tariffs were seen as a direct way to rebalance these perceived inequities. Perceived unfair trade practices. The Trump administration repeatedly accused European nations of engaging in practices that put American businesses at a disadvantage. This included allegations of excessive subsidies to key industries, most notably the long-running dispute over aid to aircraft manufacturer Airbus, which the U.S. argued unfairly harmed Boeing. There were also contentions that European regulatory barriers and comparatively higher tariffs on U.S. goods created an uneven playing field. Protection of domestic industries. A core promise of Trump's agenda was the revitalization of American manufacturing, particularly in struggling sectors like steel and aluminum. He argued that unchecked foreign imports threatened these vital industries and even national security. By imposing tariffs, he aimed to make foreign goods more expensive, thereby boosting domestic production and preserving American jobs. The use of obscure national security statutes, Section 232, for these tariffs, even against allies, underscored this protectionist drive. Tariffs as a negotiating lever. Crucially, Trump viewed tariffs not just as punitive measures, but as powerful negotiating tools. His strategy was to apply maximum economic pressure, believing that the pain inflicted by tariffs would force trading partners to the table and concede to more favorable, for the U.S., trade agreements. The repeated threats of massive auto tariffs on Europe, though largely unexecuted, served this purpose. Skepticism towards multilateralism. Underlying these actions was a profound skepticism towards existing multilateral institutions like the World Trade Organization, WTO. Trump often criticized the WTO as ineffective or biased against the U.S., preferring direct bilateral negotiations where he believed the U.S. could exert greater leverage. This led to a more unilateral approach to trade policy, often bypassing established global rules. The context for political violence: polarization and discontent. The 2024 assassination attempt on Donald Trump, while the act of an individual, occurred against a backdrop of intensifying political division and escalating animosity in the United States. Its reasons lie deeper than just the immediate act, reflecting profound shifts in the nation's political landscape. Extreme political polarization. The U.S. has experienced a dramatic increase in political polarization, with ideological divides deepening across society. This has led to a climate where political opponents are often viewed not just as rivals, but as existential threats to the nation's future. Such an environment can foster dehumanization, making extreme actions seem more justifiable to some individuals. Inflammatory rhetoric. The pervasive use of incendiary and aggressive rhetoric by public figures and media outlets from across the political spectrum has contributed significantly to this climate. Language that demonizes, delegitimizes, or even fantasizes about violence against political opponents can, for a susceptible few, translate into real-world action. While not direct causation, such rhetoric lowers the threshold for what is considered acceptable in political engagement. Rise of domestic extremism. The U.S. has seen a concerning rise in domestic extremist groups, both right-wing and left-wing, advocating for or glorifying political violence. These groups often capitalize on existing societal grievances, spreading conspiracy theories and radicalizing individuals through online echo chambers and specific narratives that portray the other side as an enemy. Erosion of trust in institutions. A growing lack of trust in traditional institutions, government, media, and even the electoral process contributes to a sense of instability and frustration. When established channels for political change are perceived as illegitimate or unresponsive, some individuals may feel driven to more radical means. Social and economic discontent. Underlying these factors can be broader feelings of social and economic discontent. While not a direct cause, economic anxieties, perceived societal injustices, or feelings of marginalization can contribute to a fertile ground for extremist ideologies that offer simple, often violent solutions to complex problems. The combination of aggressive economic nationalism that alienated allies and a domestic political climate increasingly fraught with division and the threat of violence paints a complex picture of a nation grappling with profound internal and external challenges. The recent history of the United States, marked by aggressive trade tariffs and the shocking 2024 assassination attempt on Donald Trump, has unleashed a cascade of consequences, reshaping not only economic relationships, but also the very fabric of American political life. The fallout from these distinct yet impactful events continues to reverberate both domestically and internationally. Trump's imposition of tariffs on European goods, driven by his America First agenda, had immediate and lasting ramifications. Increased costs and economic slowdown. Tariffs are, effectively, taxes on imports, leading to higher costs for businesses importing raw materials or finished goods. These costs are often passed on to consumers as higher prices, reducing purchasing power. The resulting trade friction also contributed to a slowdown in trade volumes between the US and the EU, negatively impacting GDP growth on both sides of the Atlantic. Supply chain reconfiguration. The unpredictability of tariff threats forced many companies to reevaluate and diversify their global supply chains. While aiming for greater resilience, this often meant less efficient, more expensive production, as businesses sought to reduce reliance on single countries or regions that could become targets of future trade disputes. This shift towards de-risking global supply chains is a long-term consequence. Strained transatlantic relations. Perhaps the most significant diplomatic consequence was the erosion of trust between the US and its traditionally close European allies. The tariffs, often justified on dubious national security grounds against friends, fostered resentment and a sense of betrayal, making future cooperation on shared geopolitical and economic challenges more difficult. Weakened multilateralism. Trump's unilateral approach, often bypassing or challenging the World Trade Organization, WTO, undermined the global rules-based trading system. This set a dangerous precedent, potentially emboldening other nations to resort to similar protectionist measures and making international trade disputes harder to resolve amicably, leading to a more fragmented global trade environment. Catalyst for EU autonomy. The tariffs served as a powerful wake-up call for the European Union, accelerating its drive for strategic autonomy. This includes efforts to strengthen its internal market, reduce critical dependencies, and develop its own defensive trade tools, aiming to make Europe less vulnerable to external economic pressure, regardless of who occupies the White House. The 2024 assassination attempt on Donald Trump sent shockwaves through the nation, triggering profound consequences for the U.S. political and social landscape. Heightened security and public anxiety. The immediate and lasting consequence was a significant increase in security measures for political figures, campaigns, and public events. This intensified vigilance, while necessary, also created a more controlled and less accessible political environment, contributing to a sense of public unease and fear surrounding political gatherings. Intensified political polarization. While some called for unity, the incident often led to a deepening of existing political divides. Blame was frequently apportioned along partisan lines, further entrenching animosity rather than fostering collective condemnation of violence. This contributed to a cycle where strong rhetoric from one side could be perceived as justification for extreme actions by the other. Increased focus on domestic extremism. The attempt put a stark spotlight on the growing threat of domestic political extremism within the U.S. It forced a more urgent public and governmental reckoning with how radical ideologies, amplified online, can motivate individuals to resort to violence against political opponents. Efforts to identify and counter such threats have gained renewed urgency. Impact on political discourse. The attack intensified debates about the nature of political rhetoric and its role in fostering an environment conducive to violence. While there were calls for de-escalation and civility, the incident also led to some doubling down on aggressive language, arguing it was necessary in a high-stakes political battle. Lasting societal trauma and precedent. Such a high-profile attack leaves a lingering sense of trauma and vulnerability within the population. More dangerously, it risks setting a perilous precedent, normalizing extreme political violence and making future attempts seem less unimaginable, thereby eroding fundamental democratic norms and trust. Both the economic battles and the stark reality of political violence have fundamentally altered the U.S. and its place in the world, leaving a complex legacy of distrust, caution, and an ongoing struggle to navigate deeply entrenched divisions. Forging a path forward, solutions to trade tensions and political violence. Addressing the complex challenges posed by past trade conflicts and the ongoing threat of political violence requires multifaceted solutions from governments and active engagement from citizens. The goal is to build resilience, restore trust, and foster a more stable environment both economically and socially. Mending trade relations. A dual approach resolving trade tensions, particularly those that flared under the previous U.S. administration, demands a concerted effort from both the U.S. and the European Union. Governmental solutions, U.S. and EU. Renewed dialogue and cooperation. The most fundamental step is prioritizing open and consistent diplomatic dialogue over unilateral actions. The current U.S. administration has largely shifted towards re-engagement with allies, aiming to resolve disputes through negotiation rather than tariffs. This includes working groups on specific contentious areas like steel overcapacity or digital taxation. Strengthening the WTO. Both the U.S. and the EU must commit to reforming and revitalizing the World Trade Organization WTO. A stronger, more effective WTO, particularly its dispute settlement mechanism, is crucial for predictable and fair global trade. This involves actively participating in reform efforts and adhering to its rules. Targeted dispute resolution. Instead of broad tariffs, both sides should focus on targeted dispute resolution for specific grievances. This means addressing issues like subsidies, e.g. in aerospace, or regulatory barriers through established legal channels and focused negotiations, rather than resorting to punitive measures that harm broader trade. Supply chain resilience. Recognizing the vulnerabilities exposed by past disruptions, both blocs are focused on building resilient supply chains. This involves mapping critical dependencies, diversifying sourcing, promoting domestic production in strategic sectors, like semiconductors, and collaborating on global standards for supply chain security. Investment in competitiveness. Rather than relying solely on tariffs, both the US and EU should strategically invest in domestic innovation and competitiveness. Supporting research and development, modernizing infrastructure, and fostering a skilled workforce can bolster industries without resorting to protectionism that harms global trade. Citizen action, US and EU. Informed consumption. Citizens can support businesses that demonstrate ethical sourcing and diversified supply chains, reducing vulnerability to geopolitical shocks. Advocacy for stable policy. Engaging with elected officials to advocate for predictable, rules-based trade policies helps foster a stable economic environment for businesses and consumers. Countering political violence. Healing divisions. The 2024 assassination attempt served as a stark reminder of the escalating political violence in the U.S. Addressing this requires a societal-wide commitment. Governmental and leadership solutions, U.S. De-escalation of rhetoric. Political leaders across the spectrum must commit to moderating inflammatory language and explicitly condemning all forms of political violence. Setting a tone of civility and respect for opponents is crucial to diffuse tensions. Strengthening democratic institutions. Restoring public trust in electoral processes, government institutions, and the rule of law is paramount. This involves transparent governance, secure elections, and accountability for those who undermine democratic norms. Countering extremism. Law enforcement and government agencies need enhanced, targeted strategies to identify and counter domestic extremist groups while respecting civil liberties. This includes addressing online radicalization and the spread of dangerous misinformation. Enhanced security. While reactive, maintaining robust security measures for public figures and events remains a critical solution to deter attacks and protect individuals. Citizen action, US. Promoting civil discourse. Individuals can actively promote respectful dialogue in their daily lives, on social media and within their communities. This means listening to differing viewpoints and avoiding the dehumanization of those with whom one disagrees. Media literacy. Cultivating strong media literacy skills helps individuals critically evaluate information, discern facts from misinformation, and resist narratives designed to incite fear and division. Community building. Engaging in local community activities and volunteerism can help bridge divides by fostering shared purpose and understanding across ideological lines. Active and constructive participation. Citizens should engage in the political process constructively, supporting candidates and movements that champion unity and peaceful resolution of differences, rather than those that fuel division. By addressing both the structural issues in trade and the deep-seated societal fractures, the U.S. can work towards a more resilient and less volatile future.